Hey legends, and welcome back to the least knowledgeable sim racing channel. F1 2020 is the current, most recent FIA licensed official Formula 1 game. It does a wonderful job immersing casual players in the sensation of running a Formula 1 season, or managing their own upstart team. Much of its focus revolves around getting the experience of Formula 1 across to the player. From the climb up the salary ladder, run up to Grand Prix, developing the cars, learning the tracks, and all the systems and strategies that have to be managed during a race. One area, however, where it is just about universally seen to be lacking is in the simulation level of the driving experience itself. Even F1 esports champions such as James Baldwin continually refer to it specifically as a game rather than a sim, stating that it has pronounced arcade-like characteristics which behoove a player to treat it more like a game with its own set of rules rather than something truly emulating the driving experience. With that in mind, I thought to myself, what would happen if we took an identical car and track combo, extrapolating it across 3 different levels of simulation? Starting in F1 2020, moving to Assetto Corsa, and then finishing with rFactor 2. How much would the race experience differ if I tackled each one with a high-end direct drive simulator? So here we are in Michael Schumacher's legendary Ferrari F2004, one of the most ubiquitous Formula 1 cars of all time. To match that, we need an equally legendary track, so we find ourselves at the timeless Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. Spa is renowned as one of the best racing circuits of all time, and across its sub 2-minute lap time in an F1 car, it covers a vast array of corner types, giving us a good platform to really stress test the physics engines. Make sure to subscribe, if you haven't already, to keep up with more content where someone who's never driven an F1 car before attempts to tell you what's realistic. Now, let's get to the hot laps. Starting off in F1 2020, the first thing that strikes anyone that's been to Spa or driven a laser scan version of it is that this game provides a fairly coarse rendering of the track. This is obvious crossing the bus stop chicane as it only loosely resembles the geometry of the actual circuit. The track detail is fairly coarse, as if the geometry were purposely simplified to run better on consoles. Brake markers so far are close to where one would expect them to be, and on paper all the general steering and pedal inputs are correct. That being said, the loss of grip is very simplified, as you can find out by accelerating too hard out of La Source. There is a very wide progressive band during which the car can lose its rear, but not in the snappy, abrupt way in which one would expect an F1 car to behave. The sensation of force feedback is surprisingly detailed, providing quite a bit of track surface information, but unfortunately not much actionable information about grip levels on the front axle. This means that without assists, the car can often behave in strange ways without warning. You have to be especially careful here on the curbing, as catching it the wrong way can have a black hole suction effect, pulling the car into a slide. Countersteering and corrections feel somewhat unintuitive, with the car not communicating or snapping back as fast as one would expect from an F1. You can find yourself going into a strange left-to-right pendulum before fully correcting. In Sector 2, the car inputs are surprisingly accurate to what you would expect from a more realistic simulator. As we go flat out down the final sections of the track, they seem almost bumpier than they should be, but we can put this down to the geometrically coarse rendering of the track. As we wrap up the lap, one thing I will say is that the setups made a major impact on lap times in this title. While I initially started in the 146 bracket with a mildly tweaked setup, taking one from the time trial leaders quickly got me into the 144s. The legitimate top laps appear to be in the 142 range. Bear this in mind as we move through the other simulators and cross-reference their lap times. Moving on to Assetto Corsa, the de facto open platform racing simulator for most people. AC is renowned for having some of the best designed open-wheeler cars in the business by teams such as RSS. For this test, however, we're using the official developer version of the F2004. You'll begin by noticing that the track detail is remarkably finer. The details are less broken and jagged, and there's a pronounced verticality to the bus stop chicane, not to mention far more accurate rendering of the curbing. The car is far less switchy on the throttle, providing a wider usable band for the foot to find the correct acceleration out of apexes. A quick snap correction out of La Source sorts us right out, and we're back online without losing too much time. F1 drivers are notorious for driving their cars on the limit, using the throttle to rotate the rear end mid-corner. Crossing Eau Rouge, we can see that the track is vastly more accurate overall, both in its rendering of bumps as well as overall geometry and curbing. The Kemmel Straight provides time to point out that this 7-year-old game arguably both looks and sounds better than the modern F1 2020. The curbing at Lacombe is able to catch a tyre on the inside, so we have to be more careful about how we grab these to avoid being pulled into a spin. Luckily, our steering inputs in AC are more progressive, yet also have more effect, so we feel in greater control of the car. We have to be very careful with the green Astro beyond the curbing, as it has a low grip coefficient and will spin the car if the rear tyres push too hard over it. The inputs coming into Sector 3 are remarkably similar to F1 2020, but require additional, subconscious little adjustments which suggest a more robust physics engine operating underneath the hood. While rendering the bumps over the rear section of the track, the finer detail helps the lap look and feel less juddery overall. Crossing the finish line, we came in at a time of 1:46.2, which is near identical to the current day lap record held by Valtteri Bottas in a modern F1 car. With mild tweaking, I'm able to consistently achieve times in the high 1:45s, and with some alien skills, it's fair to say one could push an additional second or two out of the car. This is contrasted with F1 2020, where a fairly cruisy lap with a top setup netted a comfortable 1:45 with potential to go into 1:44 and below at my skill level. It's worth pointing out here that while Assetto Corsa was actually more intuitive to pick up and start lapping at a reasonably fast pace, the setup adjustments and final percentage improvements near the end were harder to achieve than in F1 2020, suggesting that driver skill plays a potentially greater role in this title with the more robust physics engine. Finally, moving on to rFactor 2, one of the most robust physics engines on the consumer market for rendering open-wheeler behavior. We'll notice that rFactor 2 has the highest detail rendering of the Spa circuit, which makes perfect sense as it came out only a few months ago and represents the developer's latest track effort. The recent rFactor 2 tracks are renowned for being the most detailed in the business, and Spa is no exception. Crossing the bus stop, we find ourselves making a ton of mid-corner corrections, which immediately speaks to rFactor 2's greatest strength, the ability to drive on the limit. Every corner can be maximized because so much information is being communicated to the driver through the virtual steering column. You can feel not only all the grip underneath the front axle, but the coarseness and the road surface itself. Coming out of La Source, you can see way more mid-corner adjustments and corrections, owing to this extremely communicative behavior from the physics engine. A stark contrast from the very direct, clean, simple inputs required in F1 2020. The curbing at Lacombe is a joy to experience, with the detail being communicated in the finest of resolution. Much as in AC, we have to be careful not to clip over the inside of the curbing, as it can pull the car off the track. The experience of driving the car through Sector 2 is arguably the most unique in rFactor 2, as it allows for more pushing and using limit driving to achieve lap time. You'll often find that I'm still rotating even while the wheel is still centered, and that's because I'm able to use the throttle pedal to rotate the rear end of the car. One of the drawbacks to rFactor 2 is that this limit driving behavior, as well as its tendency to be forgiving over curbs, can be used to exploit lap times, driving in somewhat unrealistic ways in order to take risks one would normally never take in real life. We bounce off the sausage curbing at the bus stop, showcasing both how dynamic and forgiving this physics engine can be. We cross the line for a comfortable 146.1, a mere 10th off the time we achieved in Assetto Corsa. The setups for all three games were very different, owing to the idiosyncrasies of their respective physics engines. You may have noticed on the Kemmel Straight that the rFactor 2 car was a full 10 km/h slower. It, however, made up for this with better acceleration and aero in other sections of the track. It's fair to say that by min-maxing the setups on any of these games, a few more seconds could be squeezed out of the laps. That aside, for me to almost immediately achieve such remarkably similar lap times between Assetto Corsa and rFactor 2 speaks to the quality of their simulations. Both have remarkably accurate laser-scanned renditions of Spa, and while the official F2004 is quite different to the third-party VRC modded one in rFactor 2, they still somehow come down to tenths of seconds on individual tracks. We live in remarkable times for simulation. The fact that we can even get an experience this authentic from our homes would have been borderline unimaginable as recently as the 1990s. I want to take a moment to go back to the rFactor 2 lap and describe the one element which sets it apart from the driving experience of the other two titles. I spoke a bit about its limit behavior and communication through the virtual steering column, as well as its ability to ratify very geometrically complex shapes with its tires very quickly. The reason for this is that rFactor 2 has a dynamic physical tire model which operates at 2,400 Hz, several times the frame rate you'd be running the sim at. This allows it to exhibit astoundingly accurate behavior over curbs. Take a look at this roof cam footage of some high-load corners. Take special note of the shape of the tires as they load up mid-corner. Yes, that's them physically deforming to match the loads and adjusting their footprint on the track surface to match. While there are mods in Assetto Corsa to visually represent tire deformation, to the best of my knowledge, it's not represented in the actual physics code, and if it is, it's not presented particularly realistically. Hence, why we labeled this a test across 3 different layers of simulation. The net effect here is that if you enjoy F1 2020 and feel like you're ready to step it up to the next level and gain greater immersion in the driving experience, consider trying out Assetto Corsa. It has a wonderful array of mods which have kept it in contention as one of the top sims today. It looks marvelous, sounds passable, and has the largest amount of tracks and cars available for it that you'll find just about anywhere. If, after conquering Assetto Corsa, you're willing to deal with some mild clunkiness and an awkward user experience to get what is a truly transcendent driving experience, I'd recommend trying out rFactor 2. The feeling of the tires under load has to be felt to be believed. The driving experience is engaging, dynamic, and joyful on a level that a game like F1 2020 doesn't even begin to convey. That said, none of this takes away from F1 2020's quality as an immersive gaming experience. And if you watch this video solely as an academic exercise, but have no plans of stepping up to a higher tier of simulation, that's absolutely fine too. Just hit that dislike button twice for me, so I know. Whatever the case, I hope you picked up something here today which you didn't know coming in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.